All right, this is Algebra 2. We are on today, not Wednesday, Thursday, February 6, 2020. We're talking about lesson 9-4, trig values of special angles. And what do I consider special? These ones right here. So our objective today is find the values of sine and cosine of those special angles around a unit circle. So as a review, is it sine, cosine, tangent of some angle will give you the what coordinate? And I'm going to randomly choose, if I want to find the x coordinate is going to be cosine. If I want to find the y coordinate, you guessed it, it is sine. All right, so where are these coming from? So why is this point right here, why does it have coordinates negative 1/2 for the x and square root of 3 over 2 for the y? Or why does this x coordinate, why is that positive square root of 2 and that one's also positive square root of 2? Where did these come from? And this is the derivation of that. So this is a unit circle, which means that this hypotenuse is 1. I chose 1 point over here, 1 point over here. Let's do the 45, 45, 90 degree triangle. So if this is a 45, 45, 90 degree triangle, which you can see it clearly is, then I'm doing the trigonometry that we learned both in Algebra 1, I think it was just in geometry. Yeah, so this is a review of what we did in geometry. In order to move from the hypotenuse to the leg, I'm doing the operation divide by square root of 2. I think that's all we really need to know. You don't need to go from the leg to the hypotenuse, but if you did want to have that just for your notes, you could say times by square root of 2. If you look above the 3D printer, that cabinet up there in the top left area, there's 2 posters on how to do these operations if you ever forget, because they are super, super important. I'm hoping you're looking up to see if those are actually up there or not. They could be printed larger. I just don't have access to a giant printer or anything to make a poster. For this one, this is a 30, 60, 90, and that matches up with this triangle right here. So on this 30, 60, 90 triangle, if I want to move from the hypotenuse to the short leg, the operation is to divide by 2. So the hypotenuse is just twice of the length of the short leg. And to go from the short leg to the long leg, the operation is times the square root of 3. If you want to know why I'm doing that, you can use the Pythagorean Theorem and say, well, if this length is x and this length must also be x because it's a 45, 45 degree triangle, then this is x square root of 2. You can have that on there. Same thing if I say, well, if that's x, to get from x to over here, you use Pythagorean Theorem, and you'll be like, oh, well, that's going to be, well, you'll have to use it a little bit more than just x. You'll have to know that this came from a equilateral triangle, but eventually you can say, oh yeah, if that's x, then this is 2x, and this is x square root of 3. The main thing that you need to know is the operation. I divide by square root of 2, I divide by 2, and multiply by square root of 3. As long as you know those 3 operations, that's as much as it takes to get over here. So how do I get from 1 to this leg? Or to that leg for that matter, because they're both the same size. It's a 45, 45 degree triangle, 45, 45, 90 degree triangle. I divide by square root of 2 to get from the hypotenuse to the leg. So let's go ahead and say now, what is 1 divided by square root of 2? 1 divided by square root of 2. By itself, that's good. But then, Mr. Sindel, why did you come over here for that exact point and you said square root of 2 over 2? Where did that come from? It's because we have to rationalize the denominator. We have to make this a non-square root. The way that we do that is we multiply the top and bottom by the square root of 2 over the square root of 2. And now I have, whenever I have square roots and I multiply them together, you can just put them under one square root. So this is the square root of 4, just 2 times 2 is 4. And then on the top I have 1 times square root of 2, that's just the square root of 2. And then from there, I can simplify the denominator, and you can now see, yes, that is indeed the square root of 2 over 2. And that's where this number came from. In fact, this number right here, since I want a negative amount on the x-axis, my coordinate here, or my left amount is negative square root of 2 over 2. And I can make my square root slightly larger, square root of 2 over 2. And because I'm going positive now in the y direction, I'm going to have a positive square root of 2 over 2. So what about our 30, 60, 90 triangle? In order to move from a place, I'm going to go from the hypotenuse first to the short leg. From the hypotenuse to the short leg, my operation is divide by 2. So I'm going to divide by 2 here. 1 divided by 2 is 1/2. And you can see, oh yeah, that's the y coordinate here. This y coordinate here is 1/2. That makes sense there. And then to get from here to here, all I do is multiply by the square root of 3. So 1/2 times square root of 3 is the square root of 3 over 2. And both of them are positive. I'm going positive in the x, I'm going positive in the y. So those are where all of these are coming from. So now that we know those, just be careful of if they're positive or negative. But there's only 3 hard numbers, a total of 5 numbers that you have to have memorized. Those numbers are as follows. So you need the square root of 2 over 2. You need the, I'm going to do this in a slightly different color. You need the square root of 3 over 2 and 1/2. And you also need the numbers 0 and 1. So I'll put commas in between each of these. You have to have these 5 numbers memorized. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative. Those are the only possible answers with positive and negative that I can have for this drill and kill worksheet that I put on the back side. It's one of these, I guess, 10 options now. So it's very important, first of all, to have the coordinates memorized. This is kind of a cheat sheet of everything that we've been doing. It has the degrees, it has the radians, and it has the coordinates. So yeah, just have this memorized. The first thing that you have to have memorized is where is 45 degrees. Point to 45 degrees. Your arm should be out to the right, slightly raised, because 45 degrees is right there. You should be able to use your body to point to any of these. In fact, when I come back on Friday, I'm going to be quizzing you. I'm just going to say, everyone close your eyes. Everyone point to 7 pi over 6, and you'll have to point to the bottom left. Or point to 4 pi over 3, a little bit more down. You have to be able to point to these just from memory. That's why I'm making you do the Quizlet. All right, so let's go ahead and do these now. So cosine of 45 degrees, and I always say you should pause the video now. I know that you're probably not going to, but I really, really want you to pause the video and do all these as much as possible. You maybe have to flip back and forth, or maybe pause the video between here and here. Maybe I can zoom out so you can pause the video here. Pause the video here so you have it. And you can have a quick reference as you're working on it. All right, now that you've unpaused it, I know you probably didn't, but you've unpaused it. What is cosine of 45? Cosine of 45 is the x-coordinate of 45 degrees. So at 45 degrees, the x-coordinate is square root of 2 over 2. The y-coordinate is also the square root of 2 over 2. I can't really get that one wrong. This one is the square root of 2 over 2. What about sine? Well, sine is the y-coordinate, sine of 30. So the y-coordinate of 30, here's 30 degrees, this point. What is the y-coordinate? The y-coordinate is the second one. It's 1/2. 1/2. Cosine of 60. So I'm pointing to 60 right now, but you can't see. 60 is right up there, and then cosine is the x-coordinate, so that must be 1/2. Let's see if I'm correct, and it is indeed 1/2. And then you should be able to just start listing these one after the other. So I'm going to see how fast I can go, and you can check your work. I'm going to make at least... last time I promised the current pre-calculus class that I would make 2 errors. I'm going to make at least 1 error on here. So sine of 60. So I'm pointing to that in my head, and that's going to be the square root of 3 over 2. If you catch the mistake, it's extra credit, of course, right? Cosine of 135, that's going to be negative square root of 2 over 2. Cosine of 150, that's negative square root of 3 over 2. Sine of 210, it's slightly down, and sine is the y-coordinate, so negative 1/2. Be careful of your negatives. Sine of 240 degrees, 240 degrees. Oh, I'm not seeing that one in my head. 240 degrees, I have to go ahead and reference it. Ah, yeah, it was right there. 240 degrees, and then sine is negative square root of 3 over 2. 225 degrees, that's going to be negative square root of 2 over 2. Cosine of 210 is slightly to the right from the bottom. That's going to be 1/2. Sine of 330 degrees, that's the y-coordinate, so that's going to be negative 1/2. Cosine of 315 degrees, that's going to be the square root of 2 over 2. Cosine of 0 degrees, that's going to be the x-coordinate, which is 1. Sine of 0 degrees is 0. Cosine of 90 degrees is 0. Sine of 90 degrees is 1. Cosine of 7 pi over 6, oh, we're switching to radians now. Cosine of 7 pi over 6 is right there, and cosine is negative square root of 3 over 2. Sine of 4 pi over 3, that's going to be negative square root of 3 over 2. Cosine of 3 pi over 4, that's going to be square root of 2 over 2, make that negative. That's not the error. Next one is going to be sine of pi over 6. Pi over 6 is right there, and sine is 1/2. Sine of pi over 4, that's going to be the y-coordinate of pi over 4, which is the square root of 2 over 2. Cosine, the x-coordinate of pi is straight out to the left, so that's going to be negative 1. Sine of 11 pi over 6, 11 pi over 6 is right there, and sine is negative 1/2. 7 pi over 6 lives right there, and the sine of that is negative 1/2. Sine of 3 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2 is right there, sine is negative 1. Cosine of 4 pi over 3 is right there, cosine is the x-coordinate, so negative 1/2. 5 pi over 4 is, trying to remember, yeah, right there, and then cosine is negative square root of 2 over 2. Cosine of pi over 6, oh man, so that's to the right, and that's going to be square root of 3 over 2. Sine of pi over 6, that's the same spot, and then sine is 1/2. 7 pi over 4, that's going to be negative square root of 2 over 2. Cosine of pi over 4, pi over 4 is right there, and cosine is square root of 2 over 2. 5 pi over 3 lives right there, and sine is going to be the y-coordinate, so that's going to be negative square root of 3 over 2. Cosine of 300, okay, now we're mixing and matching here, so degrees, 300 degrees is right there, and cosine is 1/2. Cosine of 5 pi over 3, 5 pi over 3 is that the same spot? 5 pi over 3, I think so, and then that's going to be 1/2. Sine of 225 degrees, that lives right there, and sine is going to be negative the square root of, negative square root of 2 over 2. Sine of pi over 2, that's going to be 1. Sine of 5 pi over 4, that's going to be negative square root of 2 over 2. Cosine of 240, cosine is the x-coordinate of 240 degrees. That's one I forgot last time. 240, I think, is right there, and cosine is going to be negative 1/2. 270 degrees is straight down. That's going to be negative 1. Sine of 2 pi over 3, the sine is going to be square root of 3 over 2. Cosine is the x-coordinate of that one, so that's going to be negative square root of 3 over 2. Sine of 3 pi over 4 is right there, then square root of 2 over 2. Sine of 300 degrees is right there, and then sine is going to be negative square root of 3 over 2. Cosine of 180 degrees, that's going to be negative 1. Cosine of 330 degrees is square root of 3 over 2. Sine of pi is 0. Cosine of 11 pi over 6 is square root of 3 over 2. Cosine of 120 is, where's 120? 120 is right there, and then cosine is going to be negative 1/2. All right, so make sure that you find the error. I made at least one. I might have made more. There they are. And I will see you guys on Friday. I will be quizzing you. I'll probably put like 4 of these up for the warm-up or something like that. Your homework tonight is just, it's a very simple homework assignment. In terms of Khan Academy, I think they'll only ask like 4 of these, but you should really have these memorized, so commit these to memory. If you want extra work to do to try to memorize these, I'm going to put that worksheet online. It's not extra credit, but it is a way to make sure that you have these memorized. If you plan on going into higher level math like AP Calculus or Pre-Calculus, having these memorized is going to save you a ton of time, because I'm going to make you re-memorize these again later. All right, well, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you tomorrow.